Robert Smith has spent decades building a reputation as one of alternative rock's most private and unpredictable figures. But behind The Cure's music and his iconic image, there were reportedly a few musicians he simply couldn't stand. So who made the list, and what happened between them? Join us as we uncover the 6 musicians Robert Smith reportedly hated most and explore the stories behind these surprising music world clashes. Morrissey. Robert Smith and Morrissey were 2 of the most recognizable frontmen to emerge from Britain's alternative music scene in the 1980s. Smith led The Cure, while Morrissey became the voice of The Smiths alongside guitarist Johnny Marr. Both became strongly associated with emotional songwriting, dark subjects, loneliness, and a style that stood apart from mainstream pop. Because of those similarities, comparisons between the 2 were almost unavoidable. The Cure and The Smiths were not identical, but critics often placed them in the same conversation. Both bands attracted listeners who wanted something more personal and emotionally complicated than conventional pop music. The Cure explored heartbreak, isolation, fear, death, obsession, and uncertainty, while The Smiths often focused on loneliness, rejection, frustration, alienation, and uncomfortable aspects of everyday life. There was also an important difference between their frontmen. Smith generally allowed his music to carry much of the emotional weight. His lyrics could be deeply personal, but he was often reluctant to explain exactly what every song meant. His appearance became famous, particularly his messy hair, dark clothing, and heavy makeup, but he rarely presented himself as someone who had all the answers. He was a musician first and a public personality second. Morrissey approached things differently. His personality was a major part of the Smiths' appeal. He could be funny, sarcastic, provocative, sensitive, and deliberately dramatic, sometimes within the same interview. His lyrics and public comments often attracted as much attention as the music itself. He was also willing to make strong statements about culture, society, other musicians, and the music business. That difference became important whenever critics compared the 2. One frequently repeated claim is that Smith believed Morrissey was effectively performing sadness for an audience. Other alleged comments have described Morrissey's misery as calculated or theatrical. The basic idea fits a broader criticism that was sometimes directed at Morrissey, but that does not prove Smith personally said every quote attributed to him. What makes the supposed rivalry interesting is that Smith did not need to dislike Morrissey's music to disagree with his approach. The disagreement could have been about what emotional honesty in music should look like. For Smith, emotional songs often came across as messy, uncertain, and difficult to define. The Cure's music could move from tenderness to despair without providing an obvious explanation. Morrissey, meanwhile, often gave his emotional perspective a very clear personality. His lyrics could be bleak, but they were also filled with humor, irony, exaggeration, and sharp observations. The British music press helped make the comparison even stronger. During the 1980s, journalists frequently looked for rivalries, categories, and personalities that could define the alternative scene. Smith and Morrissey were easy subjects for comparison because both were frontmen of successful British bands and both had developed strong identities around emotional songwriting. There was also a practical reason for the comparison. The Cure and The Smiths were competing for attention from many of the same listeners. Neither band fit neatly into mainstream pop, yet both became increasingly important as alternative music grew. Their audiences could overlap, which naturally encouraged critics to ask which frontman expressed alienation more convincingly. But Morrissey was only the beginning, because the next name brought a completely different kind of conflict: Duran Duran. Duran Duran occupied a very different place in the 1980s music scene from The Cure. Both bands came out of the British post-punk and new wave movement, but they developed very different ideas about appearance, performance, and commercial success. The Cure became known for dark clothing, emotional songs, and Robert Smith's unusual appearance, while Duran Duran became famous for stylish clothes, polished music videos, glamorous members, and highly produced pop songs. That difference made Duran Duran an interesting point of comparison for Robert Smith. When The Cure began in the late 1970s, Britain was experiencing a major shift in popular music. Punk had challenged the established music industry, and new bands were experimenting with different sounds and attitudes. The Cure emerged from that environment, initially playing a stripped-down form of post-punk before gradually developing the darker sound that would define much of their career. Duran Duran came from the same general period of musical change. Formed in Birmingham in 1978, the band became associated with the new romantic and new wave scenes. But instead of keeping their image rough and understated, they embraced fashion as an important part of their identity. Their clothes were carefully chosen. Their videos were visually polished. Their hairstyles and photography became part of their appeal. Their music combined rock instruments with synthesizers, dance influences, catchy melodies, and carefully produced arrangements. This became particularly important when MTV began changing the music business. The launch of MTV in 1981 created an environment where an artist's appearance could be almost as important as the song itself. Music videos were no longer simply promotional extras. They could introduce artists to millions of viewers and create recognizable visual identities. Duran Duran understood this very well. Songs such as Hungry Like the Wolf, Rio, and The Reflex became closely connected to their videos. The band's success showed record companies that strong visual presentation could help turn musicians into international stars. For someone like Robert Smith, that development could raise uncomfortable questions. Smith had developed an identity that seemed almost completely different. The Cure's music was emotional and often dark, while Smith's appearance was unconventional and deliberately distant from the clean-cut image associated with many pop stars. He did not seem interested in presenting himself as a traditional celebrity. This is why claims about Smith criticizing Duran Duran's emphasis on image have continued to circulate. One alleged criticism portrays Smith as saying that the band had turned music into a fashion show. Other comments attributed to him have suggested that some artists were more interested in style than substance. However, the specific quotations need to be treated carefully. Some versions of these stories are repeated online without clear evidence from contemporary interviews. There is a difference between documenting Smith's broader views about the music industry and claiming that he personally made a specific statement about Duran Duran. The underlying disagreement, however, is worth examining. Could elaborate visuals actually improve music? Duran Duran would clearly have answered yes. Their videos gave their songs an additional identity and helped them stand out in an increasingly competitive market. Their fashion was not completely separate from their music. It was part of how they presented themselves as artists. Critics of that approach could argue that the growing importance of image encouraged musicians to sell personalities rather than songs. A carefully designed video could make an average song more memorable, while an artist with a strong visual identity could receive attention before audiences even heard the music. This created a growing divide between underground credibility and mainstream success. The Cure themselves make that divide complicated. Smith could hardly argue that commercial success was automatically bad. The Cure eventually became hugely successful themselves. Their albums sold millions, their concerts grew larger, and their music videos received significant MTV exposure. Just Like Heaven, Love Song, Pictures of You, and other songs helped make the band internationally famous. And The Cure did not exactly avoid visual presentation. Robert Smith's hair, makeup, clothing, and stage presence became instantly recognizable. The band's videos also became an important part of their identity. In other words, The Cure developed a strong visual brand of their own, even if that image was very different from Duran Duran's. That creates an important distinction. Perhaps Smith's problem was never simply that another band became successful or cared about appearance. The more reasonable interpretation is that he may have objected to the idea of image becoming the main product. Duran Duran's members were openly stylish. Their videos were carefully produced. Their photography was polished. Their music was designed to work on radio, television, and in clubs. None of that meant their music lacked substance, but it represented a very different philosophy from The Cure's. There are also stories of awkward encounters between members of the two bands, although the evidence for a serious personal feud is much weaker than the stories sometimes suggest. Duran Duran members did not generally present themselves as enemies of The Cure, and there is little reason to assume that any tension was equally strong on both sides. And that brings us to an even more personal battle, because the next musician came from the same punk world Smith knew firsthand: Billy Idol. Robert Smith and Billy Idol came from a musical world that valued rebellion, independence, and doing things differently. Both were shaped by the British punk scene of the late 1970s, a period when young musicians were challenging the established rules of the music business. But while both artists started in that environment, their careers eventually moved in very different directions. That difference is at the center of the alleged tension between Smith and Idol. Punk had developed partly as a rejection of the polished music industry. Many early punk musicians did not care about having perfect performances or fitting traditional ideas of what a successful rock band should look like. The goal was often to create music quickly, perform it with energy, and build a connection with an audience without waiting for approval from major record companies. The do-it-yourself attitude was extremely important. Punk encouraged young musicians to form their own bands, organize their own shows, produce their own recordings, and create their own identity. It also rejected the idea that musicians needed to look or behave like traditional rock stars. The Cure emerged from this environment. When Robert Smith and his early bandmates began performing, the group's music had strong post-punk influences. Over time, however, The Cure developed into something much darker and more emotionally complex. Their sound changed repeatedly, but Smith maintained an unconventional identity throughout the band's career. Billy Idol took another route. Before becoming a solo star, Idol was part of Generation X, one of the important bands from Britain's early punk movement. After leaving the group, he moved to New York and began developing a solo career with producer Keith Forsey. His music became more accessible, his image became more carefully developed, and his audience expanded dramatically. By the 1980s, Billy Idol was an international star. His appearance was a major part of that success. His bleached blonde hair, leather clothing, aggressive facial expressions, and rebellious stage personality gave him an instantly recognizable identity. Songs such as White Wedding, Dancing with Myself, Rebel Yell, and Eyes Without a Face helped turn him into a major MTV personality. And that was exactly where the conflict becomes interesting. The alleged criticism from Smith was not simply that Idol had become successful. The deeper accusation was that Idol had taken the attitude of punk and turned it into something designed for mass consumption. Some accounts attribute comments to Smith describing Idol's rebellion as artificial or cartoonish. The specific quotations circulating online should be treated cautiously because many are difficult to verify through reliable contemporary sources. However, the larger criticism reflects a real question that followed many punk musicians who later became commercially successful. What happens when rebellion becomes a product? For people who believed punk should remain independent and uncomfortable, a major record deal and MTV success could seem like a contradiction. A movement that had rejected traditional music industry values was suddenly being packaged and sold to millions of people. Billy Idol's career demonstrated how easily punk's visual and musical language could move into the mainstream. His leather clothes, aggressive attitude, tattoos, blonde hair, and rebellious lyrics were easy for MTV audiences to recognize. The music remained connected to rock and punk, but it was also polished enough for major radio stations and international audiences. That does not necessarily mean Idol betrayed punk. There is another way to understand his career. Idol may have taken the energy and attitude of punk and introduced them to people who would never have discovered the original underground scene. His success allowed punk-influenced music to reach an enormous audience. In that sense, the argument depends on what someone believes punk was supposed to accomplish. If punk was about staying outside the mainstream at all costs, Idol's career could be viewed as a departure from its original values. But if punk was primarily about individuality, challenging expectations, and refusing to follow traditional rules, then Idol could argue that he was simply taking that attitude into a different environment. The Cure create another complication. Robert Smith could not completely reject commercial success because The Cure eventually became enormously popular themselves. Their albums sold millions, their concerts became much larger, and their songs received heavy MTV exposure. Yet the band managed to remain clearly identifiable as The Cure. Smith never completely abandoned the band's strange, dark, and unconventional identity simply because the group became successful. That difference may be important. Perhaps the issue was not success itself, but how an artist handled success. The Cure became commercially successful while continuing to make music that did not always follow mainstream expectations. Idol, meanwhile, developed an image that was highly suited to MTV and the commercial rock market. His rebellious appearance became part of the product being sold. But the next name takes this argument even further, because it was not just about punk or rock, it was about the entire idea of pop stardom. Madonna. Madonna may be the most unexpected name in this story. Robert Smith and Madonna occupied almost completely different parts of the music world. Smith was the frontman of The Cure, a band associated with alternative rock, post-punk, dark emotions, and an intentionally unconventional image. Yet the difference between them makes the alleged tension particularly interesting. The 1980s were a period when the music industry was changing quickly. MTV launched in 1981 and soon became a major force in determining which musicians received attention. Music videos were no longer simply a way to promote a new single. They could shape an artist's entire identity. Madonna understood this better than almost anyone. She did not simply release songs. She constantly developed new looks, new themes, new performances, and new ways of presenting herself to the public. Her clothes, hairstyles, videos, interviews, live shows, and public controversies all became part of her career. She was willing to reinvent herself whenever she felt it was necessary. That was very different from Robert Smith's approach. Smith became famous without behaving like a conventional pop celebrity. His appearance was unmistakable, but he rarely seemed interested in presenting himself as a polished superstar. His messy hair, pale makeup, dark clothes, and sometimes uncomfortable interviews created a very different image from the carefully managed presentation associated with mainstream pop. More importantly, Smith generally seemed reluctant to tell audiences what they were supposed to think about The Cure. He often allowed the songs to speak for themselves, rather than turning himself into a public authority on music, culture, or society. Madonna took almost the opposite approach. She understood that her public personality could become part of her artistic work. If people were talking about her clothes, her videos, her sexuality, or something she had said in an interview, that attention could keep her name in the public conversation. What can be examined is the larger disagreement about artistic authenticity. Could an artist deliberately plan a career and still make genuine art? Madonna's career provides a strong argument that the answer can be yes. She was extremely ambitious, but that ambition did not prevent her from experimenting. She constantly changed her sound and appearance, worked with different producers and musicians, and pushed into subjects that mainstream pop had often avoided. Her commercial strategy and creative decisions were often connected, but that does not automatically make the creative work dishonest. For Smith, however, commercial calculation could raise a different question. The Cure had certainly achieved commercial success. Albums such as The Head on the Door, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, and Disintegration reached large international audiences. Songs by The Cure became MTV favorites, and Smith himself became one of the most recognizable musicians of his generation. So it would be too simple to say that Smith hated commercial success. The more interesting distinction is between being successful and making success the central part of the artistic identity. Madonna openly embraced fame. She understood how powerful publicity could be and frequently used controversy to keep attention focused on her work. If an interview created headlines, that could become part of the larger conversation surrounding her music. Smith generally seemed much less comfortable with that kind of celebrity culture. Even though his appearance became instantly recognizable, he did not build his career around constantly reinventing himself for public attention. That difference could explain why Madonna might have represented something Smith found difficult to accept. She did not treat image as something separate from music. Image was part of the artistic process. Fashion, sexuality, Choreography, photography, videos, and publicity were all connected to how she communicated with her audience. Smith's approach was much less controlled in that sense. The Cure certainly had a recognizable visual identity, but their image developed alongside the music rather than depending on constant reinvention. But the next name takes the argument somewhere much more emotional, involving one of pop music's biggest voices, the question of whether heartbreak can ever be too polished: George Michael. George Michael may seem like another surprising name to place opposite Robert Smith. Michael was one of the biggest pop stars of the 1980s and 1990s, while Smith was the frontman of The Cure, a band closely associated with alternative rock and darker emotions. Their music sounded completely different, and there is little solid evidence of a major personal feud between them. Still, the two musicians raise an interesting question about what makes emotional music feel genuine. George Michael first became famous as half of Wham! Alongside Andrew Ridgeley. The group quickly became one of Britain's biggest pop acts, producing songs that dominated radio and television. Michael then established himself as a solo artist and became even more successful. His solo career showed just how broad his abilities were. He could write, sing, produce, and arrange music, and he moved comfortably between pop, soul, dance, and adult contemporary styles. Songs such as Careless Whisper, Father Figure, and One More Try became major international hits. The Cure operated in a very different musical world. Robert Smith's songwriting frequently dealt with complicated relationships, loneliness, obsession, anxiety, sadness, death, and uncertainty. His songs did not always provide clear answers. Sometimes the emotions were deliberately uncomfortable or difficult to define. Michael's songs could also be deeply emotional, but they were usually presented through highly polished productions and memorable melodies. His voice was powerful and controlled, and his records were carefully arranged for a huge audience. That difference is important because one of the central claims in the material surrounding the supposed feud is that Smith disliked the way Michael presented heartbreak. Some accounts attribute comments to Smith suggesting that Michael had taken genuine emotional pain and turned it into something too polished and comfortable for mainstream audiences. One particularly dramatic claim says Smith accused Michael of turning heartbreak into elevator music. There is a serious problem with treating such statements as established fact. The specific quotes attributed to Smith are difficult to verify through reliable contemporary sources, and there is not strong evidence showing that Smith publicly maintained a major campaign against Michael. They should therefore be presented as alleged comments rather than confirmed statements. But the idea behind them gives us something worth exploring. Smith's approach to emotional songwriting often emphasized discomfort. The Cure could make love sound confusing, painful, obsessive, or even frightening. Their songs were not always about the pleasant side of relationships. Michael's romantic songs were different. Even when they dealt with sadness, regret, loneliness, or heartbreak, they were often beautifully produced and accessible. The melodies were strong, the arrangements were polished, and the songs could be played on mainstream radio alongside much lighter material. That raises an important question. Does emotional authenticity require emotional ugliness? It is easy to assume that a sad song must sound raw to be genuine, but that is not necessarily true. A beautifully produced song can still contain real pain. A singer does not have to sound broken for the emotion to be sincere. George Michael's ability to make difficult feelings accessible to millions of people does not automatically make those feelings less real. In fact, Michael's later career showed how personal his songwriting could become. His music increasingly dealt with relationships, identity, grief, loneliness, and difficult personal experiences. His public life also became more complicated as he dealt with intense media attention and the pressure of being one of the world's most famous entertainers. This makes the idea that Michael simply produced comfortable heartbreak too simplistic. Both Michael and Smith wrote from personal experience. They simply expressed those experiences differently. Smith often left emotions unresolved. His songs could feel uncertain and uncomfortable. Michael frequently gave his feelings a clear melody and structure that made them easier for a listener to understand. Neither approach automatically makes one artist more honest than the other. There is also an important contrast in their public images. Michael was a major pop celebrity whose face was known around the world. His videos were heavily played on MTV, his records sold enormous numbers, and his private life attracted constant attention. Smith became famous too, but The Cure retained a much stronger alternative identity. Smith's appearance and personality remained unusual, and he did not appear to embrace the traditional role of a polished pop idol. And the final name on this list takes the argument far beyond love songs, because it involves a rock star who became famous for speaking about the world itself: Bono. Bono is perhaps the most surprising name at the top of this alleged list. As the frontman of U2, he became one of the most famous musicians in the world, while Robert Smith built his reputation as the leader of The Cure and one of alternative rock's most distinctive figures. Both men came from the post-punk era, both led hugely successful bands, and both developed personalities that were impossible to separate completely from their music. But their public roles eventually became very different. U2 formed in Dublin in 1976, several years before The Cure released their first major records. Both bands developed during a period when punk and post-punk were changing what rock music could sound and look like. Neither group started as a traditional stadium rock act. Over time, however, both became international stars. The Cure became known for dark and emotional songs, while U2 developed a sound that combined rock with atmospheric production and increasingly ambitious themes. Robert Smith became strongly associated with personal songwriting and emotional vulnerability. Bono gradually became known for something much broader. He became an activist. As U2's popularity grew, Bono increasingly used his position to speak about political and humanitarian issues. He became involved in campaigns concerning poverty, debt relief, HIV/AIDS, international development, and other global causes. He met with political leaders and appeared at major international events. His public role eventually extended far beyond writing and performing songs. That created a major difference between him and Smith. Smith has generally avoided presenting himself as a political or moral authority. He has expressed opinions throughout his career, but The Cure's identity has not depended on Smith presenting himself as someone responsible for solving major world problems. Bono took a different approach. He appeared to believe that enormous fame created an opportunity and perhaps a responsibility to influence issues outside music. If the alleged stories about Smith's dislike are accurate, this may have been one of the things that bothered him. Some accounts portray Smith as being uncomfortable with Bono's increasingly serious public image. The criticism sometimes goes much further, claiming that Smith viewed Bono as developing a kind of rock star God complex, where the musician began to see himself as someone qualified to speak for large numbers of people. But once again, the evidence needs to be handled carefully. The specific quotes attributed to Smith about Bono are difficult to verify. There are stories claiming Smith confronted Bono at a festival and told him that real artists should make music rather than act as though they were saving the world. Other versions contain even stronger language. Without a reliable contemporary interview, newspaper report, recording, or other primary source confirming the encounter, these statements should not be presented as established facts. That does not mean the underlying debate is meaningless. Bono's public image really did become increasingly connected to activism. His work brought him into contact with presidents, prime ministers, international organizations, charities, and major political figures. His celebrity gave him access to conversations that most musicians would never enter. Some people praised that approach, others criticized it. The criticism was sometimes that Bono was using celebrity to give himself authority on complicated political issues. The word messianic has also been used by critics to describe aspects of his public persona, particularly when discussing the combination of stadium performances, humanitarian campaigns, and public speeches. That criticism existed independently of Robert Smith. The important question is whether Smith actually shared it. There is not strong evidence establishing that Bono and Smith had a major personal feud. Bono has generally spoken respectfully about other musicians, and there is no clear record of him repeatedly attacking Smith over an alleged rivalry. So, which musician surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more music stories you won't want to miss.